everyone, and welcome to another episode of Aquarian Light. This is part 2 of the Galaxy Within. In our previous episode, we went through extensively on how Divinity is always speaking, and throughout a lot of the Star Wars episodes, we see recurring themes to do with the ego, mechanicity, those voices that lead us astray, and how they are often hiding in plain sight, and lots of other good things. So today we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to be looking in depth at, what are we looking at, Adonis?
All right, so where did we leave off? We left off at the end of Revenge of the Sith, right? And so both Anakin Skywalker is now Darth Vader, and there's like 3% essence and the 97% mechanicity of the ego. And the galaxy, as well as a whole, has been plunged into darkness and is also basically completely under the control of the Imperial forces, the Empire, kind of like Nazi Germany in World War II. They even with the stormtroopers to boot, right? But in a sense, right, the entire galaxy is under this law and order from this totalitarian government, and all that's left is a small little band of freedom fighters. That is a rebellion, a rebel alliance, right? It's also kind of like on another scale. You have the ego and then a little bit of the essence, and it's kind of at a higher octave, we could say.
So who is the essence?
Um, well, on the galactic scale, the Rebel Alliance, a small band of freedom fighters that is trying to overthrow the evil galactic empire that is subjugating the entire galaxy, right? And in a sense, like as I said, it is a higher octave or um, higher level of layers, right, of the same thing, which happens, as we pointed out, in actual reality with consciousness, right? We talked about this in the Orion Wars, which we also talked about in the last episode, as one of the things that possibly inspired Star Wars. But as these these cycles of duality and these events all go down in layers of creation, right? So we have things on a universal scale, then there's things on a galactic scale, then there will be things on a solar system scale, and then things that happen on a planet, and there's things that happen to a civilization, and then there's things that happen to us in a lifespan, and there's our daily life. All of these things go through the same cycles of duality at these different layers, right? And it's just the same thing, right, magnified. We talk about how each one of us is a microcosm for the macrocosm of that is the universe, right? So in a sense, that's going on in the movie itself, right? Anakin Skywalker maybe being the soul that's like living in this universe, right? That's going through his microcosm, and then the galaxy itself is the macrocosm, and they're both going through the same cycles of like descending down into darkness and then having to come out of it. So, but that's where we're basically at. There is, I think, a 20-year break, maybe years, give or take or so, between episode 3 and episode 4 chronologically in the timeline. Obviously the original movies came up before by many years, but I think it's about like 20-25 years till the Battle of Yavin, which is the end of New Hope. And we begin, right, with the story of Luke Skywalker at this point. So when we touched on, I think at the beginning of the last episode, that there's 3 major arcs in Star Wars, right? The 2 that start at the beginning of the prequel trilogy, which is that of the Emperor, which is the ego, and then that of Anakin Skywalker, was like the fallen master, or maybe just really a symbol of just the descent into darkness and coming back that everyone has to do, and that aspect as well. And then we have Luke Skywalker, his son, right, who was the main storyline for the original trilogy, this following Luke Skywalker, right? It's all built around that. And it's no secret that obviously George Lucas was heavily inspired by Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which relates to this formula that we see through all types of ancient mythologies and everything, that that really, it seems like all these stories, he picked up on this thing that all these stories go through the same thing. And we even see that in modern creativity, right? So when artists create stories or whatever that is, usually the characters seem to like just inherently unconsciously we create these similar tropes. Even if it's in this case, it was actually probably a little intentional because it said that, but like even that, like anything, right? It doesn't matter. You look at like Lord of the Rings, you look like Harry Potter, right? There's all these like things that happen to the characters that the hero usually that we just inherently, whether that's our conditioning from maybe like because we are partially maybe spiritual or religious, like even exoterically, right? The mythologies and all these exoteric religions, it's like ingrained in us. It's like there's something that's deep within us, and that's the hero's journey. So
I like to see that like that it's like an archetype in a way. It's like a way that creation appears. And so even as that comes down, you have someone who's writing a story, they feel naturally like this is how a story should go. This is how all stories should go. So, we don't need to have um, someone tell us this is the hero's journey. And even a child playing with their dolls, storytelling will probably tell the same story.
yeah, well the thing is esoterically, right? The hero's journey is basically the path of initiation, right? That's what we're talking initiation, right? Um, yes, we could apply the hero's journey even to our like practical lives and like the things that we have to learn on our mission and all of these things. But internally, the hero's journey represents pretty much the steps that we have to go through in awakening, and then until we become achieve mastery, right? Like this is why it's so heavily ingrained within in our soul and in our psyche, right? Um, and through that lens, as we'll start talking about these movies, and we talk about like the points of which Luke goes through these things that represent the hero's journey. We'll also talk about how that is where he's representing the path of initiation, because that's what this story really is, right? So it's if Anakin is just the essence that descends into the darkness and then eventually has to come back and then achieve balance to awaken, right? The piece of the story that is the path of initiation that we take to getting to that awakening, since obviously once Darth Vader is Darth Vader, they just make him just the big bad, right? He's the bad of he's the main enemy, even though the Emperor is there. The Emperor is in the backseat in the original trilogy. He's like the main big bad of that trilogy. But in a sense, to complete the prophecy, Luke does the initiation work for him, and then eventually, yes, Vader's the one who eventually completes the prophecy that he was always meant to complete from the prequels. But in a sense, Luke is the one going through that initiation, and it's that path of initiation that we have to take to get to that moment where we find the balance and the Force, right? As they say in Return of the Jedi. So we're going to look at it from that perspective because I think that's really the main things that we could pull from that original trilogy. It's really classic on that journey. And then also, I mean, we'll stop to take a look at like awesome characters like Yoda, who we've talked about, but we haven't really dived into him yet. But so at the beginning of the movie, right?
Can you tell us about the steps of the hero's journey, just as a synopsis before we get into it?
Uh, yeah, I mean, so I was gonna just go through it as we go through it because there are different steps in each movie, but basically, I
Oh,
mean,
fair enough.
at the beginning, there's a call, then usually that's followed by a refusal of that call, like the trepidation, like we get it's like we when divinity, we start to see something's wrong with consciousness, we're still like comfortable in our life, we don't want to move on, right? And there's kind of a refusal to a call, and then after that there's the meeting of a mentor, also along the lines with some type of supernatural intervention. This might be when somebody goes through, say, the dark night of the soul, or something happens that shocks them into then going through. Then usually in the trope there's the meeting of a mentor, somebody that's already of a higher level of being that walks us through, and then you go through the first threshold, right? Which the first threshold is representing of like the guardian of the threshold, or that like in initiation, it's where we would need to awaken from like awaken from the matrix, right? Like that unplugging from the matrix, that type of thing. And then from that the mission begins, right? You go through the phase where there's trials and there's friends and enemies. You start to meet your enemies and your friends and your trials internally. Then eventually there's a challenge, and then eventually you have to descend into the abyss, the hero descends into the abyss and has to like face himself. And, he just falls down, gets beaten up, right? But he comes out of it. He's rewarded after that, right? There's a reward that comes from the wisdom that comes from descending down into the abyss. And then eventually there's the return back from that descent into one's inner self, right? You come back through the threshold again, now back into the regular world, and now one comes back with the wisdom, and there's a reward. Usually it's represented like a sword, something like that, as like the sword that we get internally to kill the ego. Um, and then from that point, there's resurrection, and then you come back to the elixir, and then you're master of both worlds, right? And then we achieve mastery, we create the soul, right? So it comes around in that aspect.
Okay, so then now if we're going to go into the lore, so if we start at the beginning of the hero's journey, then where does that start in the Star Wars series?
Right. So at the beginning of Star Wars, right, it opens with basically Darth Vader is running down the Death Star plans. He's run down Leia's ship, and she jettisons the droids with the Death Star plan so that they don't pick up any life forms, they don't destroy it, right? And it's shot down by divine intervention right down to Tatooine, where her long lost twin brother that she doesn't know exists happens to be. And these droids go walking around, even though they're AI robots, and somehow they're just pointed in the right direction, right? So these droids end up getting picked up by Jawas. The Jawas, sell them to Luke's uncle and aunt, and they're thus we pick up the story there, and that's where we're at the first stage of the hero's journey, right? So Luke's in ordinary life. He works on a moisture farm, very boring, mundane, just repetitive, redundant. He always feels like he wants to do something else because he's got the genes of his father and stuff, and he always wants to escape, but he's just working as a farmer, and his uncle doesn't want to let him go because he knows all this stuff. So like he's like trapped in this recurring cycle. All his friends have left. He's still there working on the moisture farm, drinking the blue milk, right? And these droids come along, right? And then this is where this would be, I would guess, the call, right? So he's cleaning the droids, and he finds the message to Obi-Wan Kenobi that has the Death Star plans inside of R2D2. He comes across it, right? And he doesn't even know who Obi-Wan Kenobi is, right? Obi-Wan has been going under the name of Ben and kind of watching over him as like this hermit nearby, but it starts to get to pique his curiosity, and they want to go find Obi-Wan. So, you know, they go they go out to find Obi-Wan. There's like an encounter with the sand people. Obi-Wan saves them, and then eventually, so the message is pulled out of the droid, right? And at this point in the movie, I'd say like you kind of have both steps 2 and 3 there, which is going to be the refusal to the call and the meeting of the mentor at the same time. But Obi-Wan, whatever, sees the message and stuff, and obviously he knows what's up, even though Luke doesn't. So he, you know, tries to hint to Luke, right, that he should come with him to Alderaan and to save the princess and bring back these Death Star plans, which of course Luke refuses. Oh, I can't. Like I have to work on the farm. My uncle will be mad at me, and that's the refusal to the call, right? So um even though we feel it, we want to, like, we're just still asleep, and we're like, oh, like that sounds great. Like it sounds great to change my life, but I don't really want to do it. You know what I mean? And then, you know, and what comes along with refusal to a call, like we said, is also that supernatural intervention. In this case, I don't know if stormtroopers are supernatural, but what ends up happening is because while he's away with the droids and the stormtroopers track down the droids, they murder his uncle and aunt. So when they get home, even though he refused the call, now he has nowhere left to turn. And then this thus pushing him to the next stage of the adventure. So he's like, well, then I guess, now they have to go, it's like there's nothing left for me here, you know.
So
So
how does that look in a normal person's life? Like if, let's say, someone is going to come into spirituality, then typically what would that look like if that's step one? the ordinary world, and then the call and the refusal. What is an example of what that could
So
look like?
this would be the example of this would be sort of like, we start to maybe have like intuition, start to get bored with everyday life, just like Luke in the movie, you know what I mean? And we may have, this like longing for something else, looking for something else. But maybe we even have like some dreams or signs or things of that nature. But still, it's like, oh, that'd be great. Maybe I have like, some things I've always wanted to do and I really want to chase after that or whatever, but I can't. I have to like work my job and like, pay my bills and maybe some opportunities come up to say go into a spiritual school or even just like go do something that's out of the normal, like out of the box. Even if it had nothing to do with spirituality, maybe like an opportunity comes up, like maybe we could go traveling the world or something, right? But then we're like, I just can't do it, because you know I have to stick with my boring everyday life, and I really want to change, but here's 95 million excuses why I can't, and I want to do something different. I know this sucks. I know that if it keep going like this, I'm unhappy. But what can I really do about it? There's that aspect, and then that's why when the supernatural intervention comes in, usually like I said, we'd say supernatural intervention, but like in a negative way. Usually, this is where the Dark Night of the Soul comes in. In Star Wars, it says family gets murdered, right? But usually with the path, right, it's something psychological. Something happens to give you that conscious shock, and it's usually something negative. It takes suffering to finally be like, I'm tired of suffering this much. I'm tired of going through this much. I'm going to change, right? Because we may want to change for years and years and years and years, but unless we hit a bottom, right? It's like an addict, right? In a sense, an addiction is a type of ego, right? Like in a sense, like okay, an addiction's to a substance, right? But really an ego is just we're addicted to this whatever sense of self that we have. So I could be like addicted to my image or I could addicted to whatever. It's not a physical thing that I'm addicted to, but mentally it works exactly the same, right? The addiction is just a type of ego. And if you really think about it, right, what really stops an addict, right, from when do they actually get sober? They may go to rehab over and over again. People have interventions and try to force them. That doesn't work. What it takes is, their families kicked them out of their home. They run out of money. Now they're living on the street and they're homeless. Maybe they're turning to crime and getting arrested because they have no other choice. And finally, they just had enough, right? They have enough suffering. I'm going to stop because of that. And that's when they actually stop. And that's when they actually stay clean, right? So it's kind of the same thing with our sense of self completely. We need to hit that bottom, and that's what that dark night of the soul represents. Right? So it's we sort of need that bottom to finally say enough is enough. It's time for a change and to do the work to actually unplug and see the illusion for what it is. Because once we see the illusion for what it is, then we can get rid of other egos without having to hit that bottom, right? Because we've unplugged from duality, so we can see everything for what it is, and then we could do the work without having to. But before that, we really need that maximum, like, kind of suffering to wake us up, right? You wake up, shock to wake up. That's like the Neo in the Matrix. Wake up, Neo. you know.
I think
Um,
of uh, this happens in octaves as well. So where you have some saint, for example, that is already in spirituality and they meditate, or maybe they're extremely devotional, and you can see they've achieved a certain level of being. And now they've plateaued because they're not in anger, they're not in desire, they're just very peaceful, but there's still something that needs to happen to push them to the next octave. And often you will hear these stories of, say, that saintly person who is in their 40s or 50s, and then their son died or something that seemed to be unfair by your regular societal views, that, oh, we think that shouldn't have happened. The father has to go before the son. And now here we have the son passing. And even though this man has a certain level of peace, when this happens, suddenly now his it's described by some as his spirit has been broken. But really what's happened is that the illusion has shattered further because his even deeper attachments and clingings have now come away. And so that the dark night of the soul is something, can be something very intense that happens, whether to someone unconscious or even to someone who is conscious and spiritual at a certain level, but they almost need that push to take them to the next stage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a little bit debatable. A lot we know for a fact that a lot of saints would fall under the category of stuff that we've talked about, and the people that aren't actually awakened, they do a lot of work. They've awakened faculties, but they because they're so like devoutly religious and attached to that duality, they haven't actually unplugged. I think the reason that's why they're able to plateau, I got some powers now that it's a spiritual ego. So and then they need something again. Divinity has to give them the shake. Now that's fine. That's like the spiral path, but divinity has to give them something to shake their reality again because they're not actually. They still have not actually broken out of reality. It's like a known thing in esotericism. A lot of saints end up coming back and being reborn and I mean, they obviously do a lot of work, and they're they get to a point like there's a lot of work that can be done without actually unplugging from the construct, right? There's a whole path dedicated to that. Um, but I do think that if one is to break out of duality and actually break out of the dualistic thing and actually have that unplugging moment and not Neo in the first Matrix when he takes the red pill and he's fighting Agent Smith, but that second one when you like come out of that and then you reach that infinitely expanding sense of consciousness where it's like basically every comprehension is a reality breaking event. It's kind of hard to plateau at that point because you don't forget that everything is growing in that sense. I'm not saying you can't, but I think the plateau is more of a something that comes along in the sense of like I said, being on that spiral path and like you take little increments and then you need to have multiple events instead of just that one big like boom that sets off like a time bomb, like I said, different paths. It depends on what the being wants for us and things of that nature.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone's journey is different.
yeah. But yeah, so back to what we were speaking of. So that the refusal to call and then the supernatural intervention is basically his family getting murdered. So it's like, well, hey, no, you didn't want to go, well, you have to go because the family's dead. So then we get to the first part, that first threshold, the guardian of the threshold, right? That symbolism for like, the point of no return. This is where it would be the unplugging moment in the Matrix where he takes a red pill or just in esoterically, right? There's a there's a point where we have to face our own ego, for example, in the internal worlds that like kind of keeps us from like really going to the astral and stuff. And I think that's really represented in the movie by the Mos Eisley spaceport, right? So now they go to Mos Eisley, they sell this speeder, they're going to leave the planet, and it's like the point of no return, right? It's like here we are, we're going to go into this space bar and find a degenerate like Han Solo with his Wookiee, and at this point, there's no turning back, right? It's my world has been just living on this little planet being a farmer, and once I blast off this planet, we've opened up the veil, right? So it's not necessarily like a hard trial for him at this point, I guess, because he has nothing to turn back to, but it does represent that's him crossing that first threshold, right? When they go through that and they leave, once they leave that point in the movie and they go towards the Death Star, he's crossed the threshold, he's crossed into the next part of the hero journey, which is trials, friends, enemies, challenges, right? Like the tests, enemies, and friends is like Han Solo and Chewbacca. The friend is Darth Vader now comes into the picture as like the main enemy for him, right? He doesn't know it's his father yet, but it's his enemy, right? And this is that they go to the Death Star, and there's stormtroopers, and there's the Empire, right? That's that whole thing, and they rescue the princess. That's another friend. All of that. That's that phase of the hero's journey. And then the next step is the challenge, rise to the challenge. What's a challenge? It's the Death Star, right? Um, that's that first challenge before he goes all the way down into the abyss, right? He goes up and they go out against the Death Star. And I think, by the way, the Death Star is really cool symbology itself. That whole it's the it's David and Goliath, right? But again, on the multiple levels, right? So it's the rebels, the empire, it's little David against Goliath, and then it's like also like Goliath is this gigantic moon base like space station that can blow up the planet, and they go up against the little fighter planes, right?
Yes.
And even like how they destroy the Death Star is David Goliath, right? Because like David Wright has to hit Goliath with the slingshot, right? He hits him in the exact spot that kills the giant. And if you think about how, so the X-wing, right? They have to go down that whatever pipe, right? And literally shoot missiles into like a space that's 2 meters wide, right? And it's like a once in a lifetime shot, and it's never gonna happen. And he does it right there by turning off the targeting computer, not relying on mechanicity, right? The first guys they miss, they use the computer. The computer can't hit it. The intellect cannot do this. No, he uses the consciousness. He uses the force to blow up the battle station with the stone out of the slingshot, basically. And then that's exactly what's going on there, which is awesome.
Yeah, so then for those who are maybe new to this, new to these topics, what do we mean when we're talking about David and Goliath? Because we're referring to something, it's an analogy in esotericism where we have a very big work to do when we apply the tools that lead to awakening. And it can seem insurmountable. And that's because we only have a very small part of us that is free to do the work. The rest of us is trapped in all of our illusions, delusions, the things that stop us from seeing the truth, stop us from seeing things objectively, all of our hang-ups, our pride, our criticism, our jealousy. And when you stack all of those things, it becomes this total web of darkness that we cannot see anything real at all. And if we try to use, like you described, use a mechanistic method to go up against it, that's like writing tons of affirmations and reading all of the self-help books and thinking, I just need to become a better person. Or, as we also talked about, going to a supposed spiritual school and becoming very spiritual and leading some what is it, the mantra singing and using all of the right Eastern instruments, and it's so nice and peaceful, and maybe changing your name so it sounds cool. It sounds very spiritual. And all of those things still don't lead to the awakening. Then if we do have the right tools and we do start to apply them, it's still very challenging. And that's what the David and Goliath analogy is, that even with all of the correct tools, a tremendous amount of precision, intuition, targeted focus that is completely outside of mechanicity is required to be able to overcome.
It's absolutely true. And it's just great, right? Because it's that 3% of the essence, right? Beating the 97% of the ego, and by using the consciousness, by using the light of consciousness, by using that once in a lifetime shot, right? I think that's what Han Solo says when he shoots off the TIE fighter and it knocks Darth Vader out. And he's like, blow the thing and let's get out of here, kid. And he's like, ooh, that was once in a lifetime. Well, it's consciousness. You won't miss. Bullseye. Didn't even have the targeted computer on. It's like, right. So, and that's where we're at the end of A New Hope. And that's the first movie, and it's a pretty happy ending. They get some medals and stuff, and you know, uh, just like the first part of any saga, it starts off with a light, and then we get to Empire, right? Empire Strikes Back, which is probably one of the best movies ever made, in my opinion. But Empire is a journey into the abyss, right? It's the dark movie. It's the one with the dark side wins, right? To extent, because every good trilogy, right? The bad guys win in the middle, right? For the redemption, right? Even that is like on the arc, right? But Empire Strikes Back represents that journey into the abyss, right? Oh, actually, wait. One other thing I just wanted to note too, because before we stepped over it, but one thing that during the test enemies allies and when he's on the Death Star too, one common trope that's not in every story, but it's very common for hero's journey is the loss of the mentor. Like he does pick up. I just realized this because we were about to talk Yoda. He does pick up another master in Empire Strikes Back, but the Obi-Wan getting killed by Vader early on is that's a very common trope as well. In the sense of like you think of like Frodo too, like loses Gandalf, even though Gandalf comes back later on, right? In Lord of the Rings, right? It's that like we go out with our mentor, we rely on our mentor. Now we're alone and we have to take on when he approaches the challenge, the Death Star later, right? We have to do the challenge on our own. Now we lost our teacher, right? It's not always, but it's a pretty common trope sometimes in these heroes myths. So,
But it's
I
very important
Mhm.
in the process of spiritual development, because whilst we certainly do need and benefit from those who have gone before us spiritually and can share their wisdom with us, the whole point of spiritual growth is to become connected to something greater that brings liberation, and dependence on someone, an individual or a group or some kind of being organized. And yes, collaboration is good, but it's that dependence and the restriction where we come to rely on it, and we create walls inside of our psychology that make up all of these strange rules inside our head, how I have to do things this way, and I have to think in terms of protecting these existing structures and reliances. That's not liberation. But liberation is when we are free to follow our authenticity from the higher dimensions. And so without those crutches, or someone in a mentorship position, or something that we cling to that stops us from being the metaphorical bird that has to be kicked out of the nest and spread its wings, whatever we rely on is going to stop us from doing that. So it's a very necessary step, even though it's painful and it's a process of letting go. It has to be, it must be for the next stage of development.
Yes. So let's move back. Like I said, we'll move on to Empire Strikes Back. And in Empire, right? This is the descent into the abyss, right? That every hero has to do. And I mean, it starts out, the rebels get found their secret base, the Empire like completely just like waxes them and just obliterates everybody, and they have to run away. And the super cool snow battle that everybody really likes, sort of visually appealing. And that leads Luke to go seek out Yoda, right? So I think Obi-Wan appears to him as the Force ghost, right? Now this is kind of now Obi-Wan's the inner master, right? It's kind of like, right, that he's the inner master, and the inner master tells him, "Oh, you need to go to Dagobah and learn from Yoda. He's the Jedi master who taught me." Now Obi-Wan kind of takes that it's his being, instead of being the outside guru, which is actually also like a pretty cool symbology too, right? In a sense, we when like nowadays the a lot of these things are public, right? These teachings, because it's been cleared from the internal world, and people are told you, and yes, everybody's path is for themselves, and we work on ourselves. But truly, originally, when there's a different like time frame and stuff, how most of these mystery schools work, would you would seek out a guru, the guru would guide you to the point where you unplugged and actually connected to your own inner master, and then yes, then the work's on your own, because you actually have that connection to your inner master. So in a sense, and obviously like George Lucas drew from a lot of Eastern wisdom, so he's drawing from like Buddhism, like Sufism, that type of stuff, right? So that idea of like, in a sense, right, you have that guru, the actual physical guru, because you're not there yet, and then when you get there, right, then even though in this it's the guru that's dead returning as a Force ghost, even at the end of the Death Star, he guides him to turn off the targeting computer, like we said, and uses consciousness. It's kind of representative of like, all right, well, now the physical master is gone, but I have the inner master that's within me, right? That I follow my being, right? His being is like Obi-Wan kind of becomes his being, right? And guide him to do the right things, what he needs to do next. Is like it's conscious talking to him. That's kind of cool too as well. But so he instructs him to go to Dagobah, and he goes and meets Yoda, and basically Yoda prepares him for this descent into the abyss. And before we continue on the hero's journey, I think is a good segue to here. In fact, you talked about Yoda a little bit in the prequel trilogy. He had some good lines, but I think Yoda really shines in Empire Strikes Back as this just like wise master character that's probably like an amalgamation like of like multiple masters. One that really jumps out at me is Gurdjieff. When Luke first gets to Dagobah, and he doesn't know Yoda's Yoda, and Yoda like kind of like tests him on his patience, and he just acts like really like silly and stupid, and like he's like really unintelligent to frustrate Luke and his patience, you know. That reminds me of a story that Gurdjieff did one time, where I think students were coming to see him for a lecture or whatever, and then he was like really late, And then when he did show up, he like walked out and then just left. And then people were getting frustrated and leaving. And then finally he like came back and almost everybody had left and they thought he was being all rude. And really he was just like, all right, well, I guess these are the people that are here to really, do the inner work, the ones that could get around those egos of feeling offended or impatient. It's like if you had any of those egos, then you're not here to hear these teachings, or you're not ready to hear these teachings. Was basically like the idea. So that energy reminds me of that. But I mean, like the training on Dagobah is like a quote fest of just some amazing quotes. Many that I have on my wall, in my home. But there's the do or do not. There is no try when he tells like Luke to raise the X-wing out of the water, which of course he fails and says it's impossible. Then Yoda does it for him. That's a great quote. I mean, it literally with with the work, right? You can't, like I said, you can't try in the sense it's like you have to do everything has to be in the present moment. It has to be now. It can't be like, oh, I'm leaving this for later. I'm gonna, it doesn't work that way. Everything is in the now, everything is present, everything is now. And if we don't realize that everything is now and that we have to do everything in now and that like even the future is another now, right? If we don't comprehend that, then we're identifying with the ego. Like if we're identifying with time at all, we're identifying with the ego. And even though that quote's not directly about time, that is kind of what it means. You know what I mean? It's, if you're going to do something in the esoteric work, you're going to do it, and you're going to do it now with presence and awareness.
And also trying as well is, yes, trying is from time, because you perceive
Mm-hmm.
that there's something that I am going to get,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we mistakenly apply that to the spiritual work, we might start to have spiritual goals, which the spiritual ego loves that. Like, here is something that I need to attain to. Now I must try to do that. Can you imagine being in meditation and trying to reach a meditative state? Well, you certainly never will, because the whole process of meditation is to let go of all conditioning, all trying, all illusion, and those patterns that we've become addicted to, where in our minds we run incessantly with all of the chatter of the egos with no rhyme or reason. All of that is our current mental sickness. So try is like a subset of the mental sickness. The mental sickness or being an ego is what birthed it. So when you take the birth child of the ego and try and apply that back to spirituality, of course you're not going to have any spiritual progress. You're going to create more mess, more illusion and delusion, and you will be very frustrated in all of your supposed spiritual practices, not getting anywhere at all.
That's absolutely true. There's a bunch of great quotes. I mean, you must unlearn what you have learned, right? He tells Luke he's asking way too many questions, and he's like, oh, you have way too much. You just like clear your mind of thoughts, because it's true. We come in with all this conditioning, right? And actually, it's part of the thing that he says both about Anakin in the first movie and Luke too. And this was something that I think maybe harkens back to old Eastern wisdom, but they didn't want to train people. Once they reach a certain age, and they say too old for the training because you picked up all the conditioning already from life. And there's like some aspect to that. You have to literally, like when we come into this, it's like everything that we think is reality, everything that we think matters, like does not, and is completely absurd and ridiculous. And it doesn't matter. And we have to basically unlearn all of that to actually know anything. The truth is that we actually internally, right? If we connect to our being, we already know everything in the universe. We have a part of us that's omnipotent, omnipresent, and knows everything, right? So we don't have to learn anything. We have to unlearn all the garbage that we learned so that we can remember that we know everything. So that's a great quote in that aspect, and it harkens to that.
I think it's also important to touch on what we mean by nothing matters, because we know what we mean when we say that. But for someone who's just heard that, they may think, what do you mean nothing matters? Or even worse, they might say, oh yeah, nothing matters. I know. And they don't know.
Yeah, it's just that relatively nothing really does matter because in the sense of like everything that's in the construct or whatever is just is is an illusion, right? It's illusion created for us to come down here, have an experience, and learn for ourselves. So I mean, relatively okay. Like again, dualistic thinking. Only a Sith deals in absolutes, which I don't think I used that. I don't think I mentioned that quote in the last episode, and I'll come back to it later because it'll be relevant for later. But you know, nothing matters, but it does also matter. Like I say, relatively at where it's certain importance, right? Everything is multidimensional. So like it matters in the sense like, yeah, we're supposed to, go through these things and learn from them and have to take experience from it. But it doesn't matter in the sense that it's not real and all this importance and this like life or death expectancies that we put on these things, taking things way too seriously, like it's all illusion. It's a game, right? You know what I mean? It's like someone who plays video games. Actually, this is really random, but I don't know if you've ever seen the show Letterkenny. But there's these hockey players, and they every time they play NHL against the skids in the show, they always like lose, and they play Chell, and they get really mad, and they're like hockey players. They start like punching and breaking walls and stuff because they lost the NHL game, and that's what I think of. That's literally like all of us when we're asleep taking like like our job, family life, all of this stuff all way too seriously. It Yes, it matters as relative, and we're supposed to go through it to learn, and there's going to be emotions and all of these things, so that's part of what it is. But like if I play a game too or watch a movie, right, it triggers stuff in you and whatever, but I still know that it's a movie and it's a game. It's not that serious. It's not like I'm gonna die because the character in the movie I like died, but we take our place in this divine universal movie way too seriously, like it's actually the truth. And what it is an illusion underneath the truth that
So
isn't
like
there for the experience.
the kinds of things that people will complain about typically, oh my goodness, this colleague said this to me, and how could they be that way to me, and don't they know what all the things that I do? And this could be someone that is in spirituality, right? And they could just say, well, yet they go home and be spiritual, meditate, talk to their spiritual friends, and then 5 minutes later they're on the phone to their mother or their uncle, their aunt, and they're just going, I know, they're so bad. Who who said this person could even exist? Why do they exist? They exist to frustrate those of us who are of a higher importance, and they don't treat me with the respect that I deserve, and so on. So we have all these kinds of complaints, these ways that we identify with the illusion, that we take everything way too seriously and we imagine expectations of other people, of circumstances. And when the thing that we imagined and how it should be doesn't happen, then we get so angry and so upset and all hurt, or whatever the sentiments are that arise because things didn't go our way, when the thing that we think is us, or even our sense of self, is also not real.
That's right. The sense of self, our inner perception, is illusion, and until we see that illusion, doesn't matter how much spiritual work, quote unquote, we do, we're still asleep, right? We could be asleep in a spiritual ego, which we talk about a lot. Yeah. But back onto where we were at, and there's another good example of that. The next thing I think about when Luke goes into the cave with the dark side, quote unquote. But really, I think the dark side's in there because the dark side's within him, and Yoda kind of hints at that, like when he goes to take his like lightsaber, right? And he goes, your weapons, you will not need them. He's like, well, what's in there? He's like, only what you bring with you. So because he brought that, well, then yeah, the dark side was in there. But the dark side really in there, or is it just like a representation of him going into his inner cave, which is another symbol that's very common on the hero's journey, about the travel journey into the abyss. But we have to go into our inner cave, and like that's kind of that, like he's going into the cave, and he obviously fails that test. He sees Darth Vader and cuts the head off, and what does he see inside the helmet of Darth Vader but his own face, right? So that's his own ego. And he brought his ego in there, he brought a weapon in him, so his ego had a weapon, and he had to fight his ego because that's how, his comprehension of the situation was. So if he didn't go in there with any weapons, there wouldn't have been anybody there to face him with any weapons. Yeah. which is akin to really, how we have spiritual experiences, whether that's, through, say, hallucinogenic substances, or it's something like even dream yoga, right? Or clairvoyant visuals or whatever it is, right? Really, it's like these spiritual experiences are as objective as our level of consciousness, and are subjective as our reality is. So, someone who's unconscious and can't even really wake in a dream, but they remember a dream, it's super subjective. They have like pink elephants and monkeys flying around and stuff, right? But an awakened master who has solar astral body and then doesn't dream at all, right? Can travel through the dream world and it looks like, planet Earth with, in the fifth dimension, right? But they're in the same place, right? So and the same could be, like I said, for other techniques. There's like tools like something like hypnosis, or like I said, some people dabble in psychedelics. You could think about that too. Why are some people freak out, and some people like, the experience is not that different than what I normally see, but what colors? Well, that's because your internal state, it's what you bring with you that comes out on the other end when you go to these spiritual worlds, these dream worlds, right? So if you're
Well,
full of ego, you see
mhm,
your ego, you see your demons.
yeah. Since you mentioned psychedelics, I think it's important to say here as well that we are not promoting or recommending them. We're discussing these phenomena, how they occur, and why. We're basically talking about how subjectivity is the king of all experiences until you come into objectivity, and that the true spiritual work or the psychological work, the study of the soul, is to gradually peel away all of those layers of subjectivity. If someone is new to spirituality and they listen to this, don't take it to mean that we are saying that you now are supposed to engage with psychedelics. We're talking about the phenomena that, we're not really making a comment on should or shouldn't. That's not about that.
Yeah, no, it's quite the opposite. We're just saying that, like I said, when you connect to these spiritual planes, that what you bring with you is what you bring out, and that the only actual way to, I suppose, make your experiences more objective is to dissolve the ego, right? There's no shortcut. That is not astral projection, not psychedelics, not hypnotherapy, right? All these things can connect you neutrally, say, right, to a spiritual plane. There's a neutral, not necessarily anything. It just does. Just let's say, right? But it to actually do the work and awaken to consciousness, you have to do work and awaken consciousness. You have to meditate. You have to dissolve the ego, because otherwise you'll just see your ego. The ego doesn't go away because you connect it to the spiritual plane. I know there's a lot of um, things in New Age that will point to, oh yeah, like just have more spiritual experiences and you'll awaken. That's not true. You don't awaken by having more spiritual experiences. You'll just keep having spiritual experiences at the subjective level of consciousness that you're at. Like you could learn to astral project and never do work on ego death, and you will constantly be attacked by demons in the astral.
Or vampires, that
Yeah,
sort of,
right, right.
yeah.
Or you could actually raise your vibration and, like I said, have astral experiences where it pretty much is like you're moving around the real world in the fifth dimension, and actually even be able to confirm that, right, when you wake up, and you can see like, oh, items been moved around and exactly there. Or maybe you saw people in your living room and then you wake up and they're still in your living room and they weren't there before you went to sleep, right? So you can have objective experiences like that, but it's not from just learning how to wake up in your dreams. You have to actually raise your consciousness and then also wake up in your dream. Because otherwise, you'll just wake up in a dream that has subjective stuff around it, and then that goes for any type of tool. So,
A
but yeah,
great little detour that we took.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great example of that. Like I said, that scene with the cave, that's exactly what it's pointing to, right? We're going into our internal world, we consider the astral, right? Like going within yourself to the fifth dimension, right? That however you get there, right? That's what you see. You will, whatever you go in with is what you'll find there, and that's what that's literally what the symbol. So that's cool. And then there's one other thing one other quote. I mean, there's a great one I have up on the wall over here, but my ally is a force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it. The energy surrounds us, binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. And I mean, just, you know, that is just so awesome. I mean, it's just like existence. This little like wise little puppet just like giving the vibes of just like this is everything is made of consciousness and we're beings of light. Don't be attached to the physical. All of it, just all of it. That's just an awesome quote. Um, and yeah, so yeah, the Yoda's definitely really shines in this movie. I mean, he shines in all the movies that he's in, but like this one specifically is like when you spend the most time with him, I feel like,
No, he's definitely my favorite in this one, besides the battle scene, his glorious battle scene as well.
Yeah.
Two key moments.
So then, right, Yoda's kind of preparing for the abyss, even with the experience at the cave, and then he finally actually like descends into the abyss, maybe prematurely, right? Yoda tells him he's not ready yet, but he goes anyway because he's drawn there. Sometimes, right? How can you be ready in a sense? You know, it's time to go. To go. Maybe you could have prepared more, maybe not. I don't think that's the point. The point is, he goes in there because his friends are in trouble, and he confronts Darth Vader, right? That this would be the example of going out into the abyss and getting beaten and facing your dark side, right? And of course he's gets beaten, right? His hand gets cut off, which we already talked about how they use that symbol for Anakin as well. Actually, this would be the first time they used it. If anything, the other one is more of a harken back to this, but it's the same idea where you have a little bit of ego now, you're a little mechanical now, like you got the robot hand, right? And that's the bottom point of the hero journey. So now you've come like all the way halfway around the wheel. You've gone to the abyss. You've been knocked down, right? And now you have to start the journey back up, the return, right? So he faces that ordeal. That's the next step. It's called the ordeal. He faces the ordeal, and then the step after that is the reward, right? And in this sense, the reward is not so overtly obvious, not like he gets like a medal, right, for facing it, but his friends do save him, and he gains wisdom out of that. It's usually what the reward is anyway, right? We after we go through this ordeal of facing ourselves internally, and we go down into the deepness of our psychology, and it sucks, and we have to face ourselves and really face our darkness. And even though it was difficult and hard, and even though we come out scarred, like he does, he comes out scarred of this, we come out with more wisdom. That's what the reward is. It doesn't have to necessarily be, it's not like a trophy or something, and we see that he comes out more wise, right? Like as the movie ends, right, he has more wisdom. They're getting ready to go save Han Solo. He's like learned his lesson, you know what I mean? But like I said, he's a little scarred, but he's come out wiser from the encounter, and I think that's represented there. So that's what we get to at the end of Empire Strikes Back, and then comes the Return of the Jedi, right? So the Return of the Jedi basically represents that last quarter of the wheel. So coming back through that third threshold, well, coming back through the threshold, I would say, back to the real world, and then resurrecting, and then finally coming back with the elixir and becoming a master of both worlds. The things that happen at the point of the journey. And the movie begins, right. We're at with the step that would be called the road back, right, and that's the whole interaction, right, where they're saving Han Solo, right, when he finally shows up after the opening scenes of Jabba. First Leia goes, and then Chewie, and all of that, and there's some grossness where Leia's like being like kind of like womanized by a slug, right? But when he shows up, right, now he's a Jedi Knight, right? You can see he's come back with the wisdom, and he's a Jedi Knight. Now all of a sudden, like his powers are like fine tuned and stuff. He like, fights the Rancor, all of this stuff, and literally with the road back, when we cross the threshold, like I said, remember I mentioned at the beginning of the symbol of we were given a sword, and now internally we're usually given a sword by like the Divine Mother. I think at a certain point of the pathway of initiation, I think around like after creating one of the solar
The
bodies.
being is given the sword,
Yeah,
right?
the being is given the sword internally, right? And I love it because in this movie they literally have that symbology. So like when he makes that return back so that we're at that step, the road back, crossing back over the threshold now, back to the real world, and it's right with the scene where he's ordered to be executed, and Jabba's like, throw him off. And he gives the nod to Lando. The nod, and Han Solo's like kind of blind, and he's like, oh, he's like, wait, what's going on? I know something's about to go on. And then R2D2 like comes up and like pops out that lightsaber, and he throws him the lightsaber right when he comes off of the sail barge, and then that's the sword, right? He's got the sword. He's now constructed. He's not using his dad's sword. He's not using his dad's lightsaber. He's now finally constructed his own sword. That's so symbolic of like, I've done the work and now I've earned this, right? Because before, remember, his lightsaber was Anakin's old lightsaber, the one that Obi-Wan took from him in Mustafar. Like he picks it up after he was like burning like a piece of steak. And he gave that to Luke, and Luke loses that in his fight with Vader, so he loses his weapon. But when he finally on the road back, and at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when he finally collected it, he's constructed his own lightsaber, and that's the sword, right? That's great. And then that's the resurrection moment too, right? That's which is the next step. He's now resurrected. Now he's back, right? And he's a Jedi again, and whatever. They kill Jabba, they rescue the friends, and it's a happy day, right? So that's really cool. In that sense, this symbol of lightsaber. He goes back to Yoda after that, who's now dying. And also has some good quotes there too. He asks like, why he didn't tell him that Vader was his father. I guess I skipped over that, but I figure everybody knows that Vader reveals that he's his father, right? They're in the conflict, which is a heavy burden on him, obviously, because he wasn't really necessarily ready to hear it. And Yoda just says a great line. He's like, oh, told you, did he? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, unfortunate. He's like, what? Unfortunate that I know the truth. He's like, no, unfortunate that you like rushed off and incomplete your training was, and all of these other things that you weren't ready for the burden. So true. It's like we're always you were impatient. It's not so much that you, if we would have told you, you would have known when you were ready to know, but you rushed into something and you were still full of ego, and that's why you were hurt and suffering. Whereas if you had dissolved that ego and then you got the news, it wouldn't have affected you because you had done the work to that. It's just like it doesn't matter. So that's great. That's great too.
It's such an important lesson because when we are walking a spiritual path, one of the, well, there's so many trip ups, but one of the big trip ups is impatience. And I'm sure all of us deal with this, where it doesn't have to be with even with your spiritual progress. It can be just general impatience with everything, even in your normal life. And that problem of being impatient is what will keep you trapped and stuck in time, in ego. And of course, it's even worse if you apply it to supposed spiritual progress that you're seeking, of wanting to have some kind of attainment. Because we've talked about it many times that we don't ever attain anything. It's the being that has these attainments, these achievements. And when we say being, we mean the higher part of us, the higher aspect, the God within. But we are the smaller part, that small little light spark that does our part on this level. And so impatience is really an exaggeration of our own importance, that I need to get this thing. So who's thinking that you can get anything in the first place? And who's in a hurry to get it? So it's yeah, patience is a big one to watch.
Yeah. And then, so then right before, I guess Yoda dies, oh, he tells him that he doesn't need any more training, that all he has to do to finish up is to confront Vader again, which he will. Um, so now it's like, all right, like the resurrection, like he's come back. Now it's been confirmed, like, oh, you're good, you know what I mean? Like, and then he dies, telling him there's another Skywalker, and then Luke goes to talk to his being, right? He calls on Obi-Wan. He's like, oh, what's up with all of this? And there's some that this is where the great line, I think we mentioned this in the first episode about Vader, but this is when he has the line that he's like more machine than man, because Luke obviously has compassion and he wants to help his father. So he still feels good in him. But Obi-Wan tries to caution him on it. And he says he's more machine than man, twisted and evil, you know. He also, there's another great line too when he asks him why he didn't tell him the truth, and he talks about perspectives and how, in a sense, everything is like a subjective perspective. So in a sense, once Anakin became Darth Vader, he ceased being Anakin Skywalker. So in a sense, Darth Vader did kill him from a certain point of view, which is funny because that's like literally how the ego works. We can twist anything to make sense logically. So it's funny that he gives him that like topic on like how like from a certain point of view, thing can look a certain differently and things of that
That's such a
nature.
great lesson.
Mhm.
Like you said, that's how the ego sees everything. I think I don't remember if I've shared before that there was a certain circumstance where someone that I knew, I was thinking that they were the bad guy and that they had done all these bad things. And when questioned on it and when drilling down on the facts, it turned out that they hadn't done anything bad at all. But it was all just this warped perspective that turned it into something it was not. That's how subjectivity works. So we can go and tell all our friends how someone is tormenting us, and really we're tormenting us. We're tormenting ourselves with these false beliefs and the lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah. And then there's the last stages, the return. Well, not last stages, two stages off. There's return with the elixir, and this is like when he comes back to his friends and then decides to go on the mission to go try to, help out and turn Vader um back to good or something along those lines. But like he decides to come back, and that's represented in that moment. That's when so we have resurrection. We come back with the eternal youth, the eternal life, right? It's like the last step before the end. Now we have to face this final, I guess, trial that it's to achieve the mastery, right? So he comes back, and then I also just have to mention that Obi-Wan also reveals to him that Leia is his sister, which is probably one of the worst plot twists in a movie, and kind of creepy, but it is actually important because during the confrontation with Vader, a line about that actually like has, so I'll mention it. Otherwise, I would have glossed over it. But so he goes with them to Endor. He senses he's endangering their mission because Vader can sense him. So he turns himself in, and now goes to confront him, and tries to talk Vader into um turning against the Emperor. And of course, Darth Vader is like, it's too late for me. Like I'm already, evil. So they go. He does, and he goes. He thought he could just turn him, and he wouldn't bring him from the Emperor. But he does eventually bring him from the Emperor because it's all meant to be. So then we end up in the last scene, right? And this is going to be the step where he becomes master of both worlds. But just in general, now he's face to face with the ego. Like, right? We talked about how the Emperor is the ego, and that's the last thing to become a master of both worlds. Right? We have to destroy the ego and become the master. Right? This is the moment, right? The balance, right? And he goes up in front of the Emperor, and the Emperor does the same thing basically they did to Anakin, right? He's just like, oh, ha ha ha, I've like been one step ahead of you this whole time. It's like, I knew you guys were coming, and by the way, that little secret plan that you have down at Endor, oh, I have all of my stormtroopers out there, and like it's a trap, right? And then, oh, and your fleet that's showing up. Oh, by the way, the shield is up and this Death Star works. So we're just gonna start destroying all your friends while you watch. And like, oh, don't you want to like? He does that weird thing where he's like, oh, don't you want to strike me down? I can feel your anger. Take your weapon and kill me. He says like this weird thing. It's like, kill me and become the next evil person. Like I'm cool with that, because he's just the ego. It's like I'm going to you. You'll be the next ego. Kind of like that energy. And so, and he starts to get to Luke, like, I mean, obviously this is a trial, right? So eventually he gets to the point where he gets so angry, and he probably does want to kill the Emperor, but he doesn't go so far with that. It's like, I think this is akin to when we're later in the work, right? When the ego tests us, like we'll get to points where the ego tests us. You're never going to like maybe go as far as to actually identifying with it, but you're just like, you have all this cognitive dissonance. So Luke's response to that is to yes, he grabs the lightsaber, but then he engages Darth Vader in combat instead of like just killing the defenseless Emperor. That what he's trying to goad him into doing. He doesn't go all that far, but so the ego comes out a little bit like Vinny identifies with the anger. So and then so he starts fighting Vader, and this goes on. Of course, the plan falls apart because the ego never wins. The little Ewoks help them to eventually destroy the shield. Luke is able to hold on with trying to convince Vader, and also just like able to not turn to the dark side, right? He doesn't give into his anger. He doesn't give into his hate. The pinnacle moment of that conflict is actually when he tries to just disengage and go hide, and then Vader like reads his mind. And this is why I mentioned the thing with the sister, because it's actually important for this. But he goads him on his sister. He's like, if you won't turn, maybe she will. And that's like the last bit of anger that he has. So it comes out, and he starts taking his anger and frustration on Vader, and he actually cuts off his hand. And in that moment, he sees the hand, the robot hand, like broken, and then he looks down and he sees that his hand, the little bit of ego, the little bit of him that's a robot, and he just throws away the lightsaber, and is like, and that's it. It's complete. He's like, I'm not giving it to the ego. That's it. I'm a Jedi, like my father before me. And then the ego goes, the ego is not going to have that. All right, well, I can't have you. Then so be it. Die, Jedi, right? Starts electrocuting him with the lightning fingers that he likes to do. And then this is where we come full circle, and we were talking about, like, and again, the balance of the force, right? We talked about in the first episode that the fall, right? The fall was because of his lust for Padme, right? It was a lustful energy, not real love, right? It was an attachment, like a teenage infatuation, and this attachment and dependency is what leads him to fall. It's the lust leads us to fall, like, right? That's such a good trope. And then what's amazing is that finally, seeing his son getting just killed defenseless by the Emperor, he finally connects to unconditional love, the actual balance, like we've been balanced. And it's in that moment that he's able to grab the Emperor and throw him down thing and bring balance to the force and bring balance to conscience, because he finds that balance and experiences actual love. And it's not from being too evil or too good. It's by feeling love, which is the balance that actually brings balance to the prophecy. Just so awesome. That's such an awesome moment. And really, when we like look at the whole thing in totality, right, in the whole arc, and then they've touched on this early at the beginning, but like I said, Anakin, yes, he's the fallen bodhisattva, he finds redemption, but like I said, his whole life, in a sense, is the arc of what the essence goes through, descending in the beginning of a golden age, picking up conditioning, right? We come in really innocent, which is why we're able to fall into the conditioning and fall asleep, fall into the ego. Then you go through many lifetimes being asleep until you finally wake up, and then you can finally ascend out of it. And that's kind of that. But what's even cooler is that on the galactic scale, like I also touched on this, is that that's what's going on with the whole galaxy if we really look at it. Like we pick up and we're on Naboo, and we're like at the high times of the Republic, and there's been 1,000 years of peace, and it's a golden era. And then the ego starts to right, it starts with a little conflict on this planet, and then all of a sudden now it's a war. And I was like, and if you really look at it, what's going on with Anakin as a person is going on with the entire galaxy. And that essence becoming entombed in the ego by the midpoint, and then that ego having to be liberated through the path of initiation through the first 3 movies. Whether, like I said, the rebels are the essence, Luke is the essence, Anakin is the essence, right? And the Empire is the ego, the Emperor is the ego, the Stormtrooper, all the ego. It's like levels, just like how actual like creation works. There's levels. It's all mirroring each other down. Like, you know what I mean? What's going on with the karma of a country is going on with the karma of the people, with the karma of the collective, right? The karma of galaxies. We'll have an episode where we're talking about aliens at some point too. But like, right, these karmas are all coming down. The same process is happening at every single level. So it's like really cool. And yeah, and we talked about it being a galaxy within and all of that. And that's what's so awesome, I think, about the whole thing, is it is so well done, to that not just the tropes and all the things are captured, but the fact that it's captured at every single level, like the transformation that an entire galaxy goes through, just like how it actually happens in the actual world. So I think that's really unique, and there's a lot of wisdom there, and there's a lot that could be learned from that.
100%. And that brings us to the title, The Galaxy Within, that everything is happening on layers. And while we don't have direct control over what is happening at the galactic scale, we're a piece in a very large cosmic dance. and for each of us to play our part if we sense that we are in mundane life. Maybe we're even supposedly spiritual, but still we're in mundane life. Maybe if you're listening to this, you're feeling a call. That's the inquietude, that yearning for divinity, the yearning to know oneself, to descend into one's interior darkness, to do the work. And maybe you have been in a state of refusal. So you may be, after watching this, about to embark on the hero's journey. You may be about to discover the galaxy within, or you could be at any stage of that journey. And as I said before, it can go round again. You can have tests in layers, you can have challenges in layers, and you can dissolve aspects of your own interior darkness and extract the light in layers as well. So in the same way that there's a beauty and an order to what happens on a cosmic level in this great cosmic dance, for those of us who are committed to doing the work over the course of a lifetime, many lifetimes, it starts with putting one foot in front of the other. And that's what all of this is really about, right? We talk about it, and it's amazing how one author could fit so much wisdom and symbology into this series. And it's great to admire it and look at it and study it and see all of the connections. And then when we bring it into the practical, the application comes back to the same thing, doing the work as an individual and using all of the things of life to do that, being observant, observing ourselves and how we're reacting. So maybe this is your call. But is that good to stop here? How are we feeling? Are we
just
hearing more?
no, just everybody remember to vibrate at a higher frequency and maximize your dharma for the collective. Love and light to everyone.
Yes. And be the change, be the light you want to see. We'll see you next time.